Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to talk to you about undergraduate research in the virtual world. The benefits of undergraduate research are multifold. For students, it allows them to learn problem-solving skills, proposal writing skills, improve their communication skills while working in team settings, and also understand project management. For faculty, undergraduate research will allow them to have bigger research agenda, particularly in liberal arts institutions, where teaching loads are heavy. It will also enable faculty to improve their pedagogical skills beyond the classroom. There's also benefit to the institution. Presentation and publication of the research product done with students can lend itself to higher visibility of the institution, also allow the institution to recruit diverse students as well as faculty. Undergraduate research in general has been growing in various disciplines, particularly in STEM fields. However, undergraduate research in economics has not been as fast growing. In fact, one can argue research assistantship is one of the most underutilized pedagogical tools in economics. During the COVID-19 pandemic, research by economists has accelerated. The prospect to study the effects of various policies on socioeconomic outcomes due to the COVID-19 pandemic has allowed economists the opportunity to take on multiple research agendas, albeit not equally distributed by gender or race. This COVID-19 pandemic is also an ideal situation to allow for opportunity of collaborative work with undergraduate students, especially since many of the students are having or have had firsthand experience related to COVID-19 itself and policies around it. There are several formats for undergraduate research. There's a thesis, there's research attached to a particular class, research assistantship, where the professor is the primary author and students provide assistantship such as cleaning data or doing literature review background. And there's also the undergraduate research type, where there's collaboration with faculty, mentor, and undergraduate students. This is the undergraduate research we're going to be talking about today. This kind of research can happen both in person or, as most recently has shown, virtually. So what does that mean for such collaboration to go virtual? What adjustments can make the experience of engaging students in undergraduate research be more efficient for faculty and more interesting for students? Adapting undergraduate research to the virtual world follows mostly similar structure as doing undergraduate research with students in person. There are 6 elements that I believe are important in addressing undergraduate research with students and making it successful. First, you need to have some sort of a contract. You need to have balanced schedules. You need to have balance in pedagogical approaches. More importantly, and this is particular to the virtual world, there has to be familiarity and ease of access to resources. Students need to see themselves as scholars and researchers earlier on in the research process. And last but not least, students need to engage their research in the virtual public forum, where if it was in person, they would have done it in person conferences. So let's talk about each of these elements separately. First, let's talk about contracts. Contracts should have explicit expectations listed. They need to be formal as means of accountability, and they need to be signed both by the professor and the students. Contracts should be consistent, and they should include expectations about meetings, both with the professor and other researchers that might be in the research group. In the contract, the professor should be checking in on mental and physical health conditions with students in addition to research progress. They should encourage peer meetings to work together outside of meeting with the professor. And when designing contracts, you need to be very cognizant of the fact that Zoom fatigue is real. Therefore, time spent on Zoom meetings, both with the professor and peers, needs to be limited. The contracts need to specify regular and timely contact on both sides, and they also need to specify the means of contact: email, phone calls, Zoom meetings. Contracts need to set clear and well-scaffolded expectations, indicating how many weekly hours of work outside of meeting time are expected, especially if the position of the researcher is paid. They need to be actionable items and deliverables, and you need to provide resources whenever possible for these items and deliverables. And there needs to be a clear expectation about the quality of work that is to be submitted to the professor. The contracts further need to specify any expectations about conference presentations and potential publications, both during the student's time at the college as well as post-graduation. There also needs to be a specification of what the outcomes will be for failure to meet the standards specified in the contracts. These can vary anywhere between the research progress ending, the student being fired from the research group if they're being hired for pay, and or how much work is expected of them to make up the standards. Last but not least, contracts need to create ladder opportunities for peers to learn mentoring skills. This essentially means creating senior researchers and junior researchers in a research team that will continue to work together for an extended period of time, allowing senior researchers to mentor junior researchers, and also reducing the amount of workload the professor may have. The second item you need to be aware of is that you need to have balance. The first balance we're going to talk about is the balance in schedule. When you're talking about balanced schedule, you need to be able to support students' varying abilities and need for research process. That is, different students come with various backgrounds, both in economics and technological knowledge, research knowledge, and other kind of needs that may not necessarily be related to the research directly. In your scheduled meetings, you need to have both one-on-one meetings and team meetings where applicable to make sure that you are reaching students and understanding their limitations, barriers, and capacities, both in a team setting as well as one-on-one. There needs to be a balance of expectation and support, particularly if we're doing research virtually. You need to be understanding, especially during the pandemic and during the virtual world. Students are feeling new stresses associated with online learning and doing online research, in addition to the number of other reasons that already exist associated with doing research in person. Furthermore, there needs to be some flexibility, commitments to class or to family or work, as well as technological difficulties such as loss of internet, loss of electricity, can make it difficult to adhere to strict schedules by students. So there needs to be some flexibility built into your plan of doing research. Finally, you need to provide a sense of community. This happens by having more than one researcher, if possible, in your research team, and having the conversation both about the research and other life-related issues be open and listen with compassion. To the extent that you're comfortable, it also helps when you can share your own difficulties and encourage students to ask for help when needed, making the whole situation be something that you are going through as a group and not that the student is going through it by themselves with no support. The second balance we talk about is the balance in pedagogical approach. There needs to be a balance between instruction and do-it-yourself approach when it comes to research, particularly online. It is good that economics already lends itself to such a balance and makes it easier to do online research using technological tools. Most economic research uses data that already exists, so this makes it easier to do so. But make sure that your students are aware of these resources and that they can access them easily. It is important to always follow up with students to make sure that they understand and the use of the research methodologies that they are using, and that they are collecting information in which that are relevant and that they understand why they're collecting them. One of the things that research has shown, especially during this online teaching, learning, research process, has been that students are less likely to use school-funded resources through a library, are more likely to use primary internet resources as source of information. As such, it is always important to encourage students and to enable them to use all resources available, and moreover, make sure that they understand it. Since we're talking about resources, this will be the biggest difference between in-person and online research, undergraduate research. Students need to be familiar with resources, both those related to research and economics, but also particularly those related to information technology. There are various apps and platforms and programs out there to enable research go smoothly. When it comes to communication, you can use email or you can use Slack channels to allow you to communicate efficiently. You can have your meetings via Zoom, which seems to be the most popular version of meeting, but you can do it through FaceTime. If you have international students, they might be more prone to using things such as WhatsApp, Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, or GoToMeetings. Scheduling is important, especially at the beginning when you're setting up everybody's schedule. You can use Doodle Calendly, but there are so many more, such as Setmore, Simply Book Me, or ones that your institution already has, such as Canvas, Blackboard, or Sakai. It will be in your best interest to know how these resources work so you can teach it to your researchers as well. You can also have team working space. These can be very creative or very simple information-based kind of softwares. For example, Google Doc will allow you and your researcher or researchers to work on the same document together and make edits, whereas things such as Jamboard or Mural tend to work as a whiteboard, allowing you to be very creative on how you connect ideas, how you outline research paper, or how you provide graphical analysis to show and demonstrate theory for the paper. You can use Trello and Toggle Plan to manage the project, provide deadlines, provide expectations, and in essence also spell out the terms of the contract. Other useful resources that you might find can aid in the undergraduate research process when it goes online are things such as access to institutional library, use of any previously recorded lectures that you may have to provide theory or examples that are useful for the paper, Mendeley, that does the same thing. PDF export allows you to annotate all PDF associated with your literature review, whereas Adobe Reader Pro will help with the Zoom fatigue since it allows for the reading out loud of any documents. Please note that students' access to technology is heterogeneous. As such, the flexibility that we talked about earlier becomes very, very pertinent. The resources that are associated with online teaching, learning, and research are probably the main difference associated with in-person undergraduate research and online undergraduate research. Other things that are important in general for doing any undergraduate research, both in person and online, is having students think of themselves as scholars. Students need to see themselves as scholars early in the research process. That means they need to have, as what Claire Jarvis calls, a scholarly identity. A scholarly identity which intersects with many other identities of students, such as race and gender, have three main components. One is competence, which is the idea of accumulating knowledge and understanding material, which is what you hope to attain through this undergraduate research. But in addition to that, scholarly identity has a performance element to it. That is, your researchers need to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. In other words, they need to be able to use the tools they know in economics and understand them, and be able to use jargons that are relevant to the economic field and the topic that you're studying in their conversation with others. Lastly, scholarly identity includes recognition. That is, researchers, particularly in this case, undergraduate student researchers, need to be recognized as scholars in economics by meaningful others. Meaningful others include yourself as a research advisor, other professors, or even family members. As part of the self-reflection as a scholar, it would help if there are weekly presentations and discussions of the work that students are doing with the professor and any other researchers on the team. This helps students get more comfortable with the performance and competence part of the scholarly identity, and having the presentation be validated or have students answer questions by professors or others in the research team will provide recognition. Through time, as the research progresses, student researchers should have increasing ownership over their time and therefore plan their research accordingly and be able to set their own deadlines and their own expectations of the outcome of their research. Second part of being a scholar or thinking of yourself as a scholar is public engagement of the research. And when we do undergraduate research in person, we usually encourage students to attend as many conferences as possible, whether it's the Southern Economic Conference, the Midwestern Economic Conference, or the Eastern Economic Conference, which all lend themselves really well to undergraduates presenting research, both in the specialized undergraduate research sessions, but also as co-authors in the non-undergraduate research presentation sessions. So how do you prepare students to get to that level where they are comfortable to present, both in conferences, in person or virtually? First, it is important that they present to professors and other teams of the members of their research in preparation of the conference and be able to address questions that are coming out of the team in order to be able not to be surprised when they're presenting it at conferences. Other presentation opportunities would also be very helpful. Students can present on-campus related events such as academic festivals or any parents' weekends where they can engage different kinds of audiences and they can learn how to present their ideas at different levels of technicalities. Last but not least, it is important to make sure that students are comfortable with engaging in their research in the virtual public platform. As I said earlier, the in-person example of this would be going physically to conferences. However, in the virtual world, this means presenting in virtual conferences, both for large economic associations, but also for smaller specialized ones. Please do not skip this step. It is very tempting not to have students participate in virtual conferences, since the logistics of virtual conferences were difficult to understand to begin with, but it has been found to be tremendously helpful. Final thoughts. The benefits of undergraduate research, be it in person or virtual, is that it definitely helps students learn. It is relatively easy to transition from in-person to virtual research in economics, since we do not have any lab setups or do not necessarily need to collect data in person. In addition, working virtually makes it easy to connect with peers, with professors, and other researchers and various institutions in the world. Sometimes it requires a Zoom meeting for you and your research students to meet with a prominent economist in the field that you're studying in a completely different country, which you would not necessarily always be able to do if the expectation was to always have an in-person meeting as we did pre-COVID-19 pandemic. The barriers associated with virtual undergraduate research is that it can be more difficult to address certain problems over the internet, especially if they're related to statistics or graphical understandings of theory, method, and result. even in a video conference setting. Second, working from home can have both a positive outcome to it in that students can have more support, but it also means that there are a lot more distractions, such as televisions, family obligations, work, siblings, and a workspace that's not necessarily conducive for research. In particular case of international students, not being able to go home has had significant emotional toll. So it is important that professors need to be aware of this double-edged sword when it comes to working at home and working virtually. In addition, staying motivated through the challenge of online research can be hard to navigate, partly because of Zoom fatigue, but partly also because of this idea of isolation and not necessarily being able to share ideas as easily as we would like in person. So sometimes, for some students, the best course of action may be to put their research project on pause and continue again once they have access to on-campus research resources. I cannot emphasize how important and how useful and how rewarding undergraduate research has been for me. In particular, undergraduate research online has translated in many papers being able to be moved faster through the pipeline, and more students being able to access the opportunity for research in economics. Thank you.